information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Andy Duncan, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Today, Monday, November the 19th, in the week following his farewell address to Congress, I'm very privileged to be speaking to Congressman Ron Paul. Hello, Congressman Paul.
Hello, nice to be with you today.
This year, the Republican Party chose Mitt Romney as their presidential candidate, who went on to lose against Barack Obama, whereas I think you would have won. Despite this setback, you still achieved much with your campaign. You brought Austrian economics to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Very importantly, you brought the Federal Reserve out from behind their green curtain in the Emerald City. And best of all, you regularly brought looks of panic onto the face of Chairman Bernanke. What do you believe your presidential campaign accomplished, and what do you think its legacy will be?
Well, the thing that I feel most pleased about is getting young people to think about important issues such as individual liberty, property rights, contract rights, monetary policy, and the role of government. And I think that is necessary. Actually, to change things, you have to change people's mind on what they think the role of government ought to be. And young people seem to be responding to my concerns that I expressed that we're in a mess. They have a mess. They're getting out of school. They have a lot of debt, and they don't have jobs. And it has a lot to do with the fact that in the last 100 years we drifted away from the original intent of the Constitution, and we have a government that doesn't even resemble what the founders wanted. And I am most pleased with the fact that the younger generation, in large numbers, is now looking at these views, and I just hope we can keep the momentum going.
And where do you see America going in the next 4 years under the second term of President Obama?
I think economically it's going to go down, but I think it would have gone down with Romney as well, because none of them talked about the issue of what the role of government ought to be. Should we not be the policeman of the world? Should we not be the lender of last resort and bail out everybody? Should we run a welfare state? They didn't ask these questions, so they don't even talk about cutting spending. So whether it's Romney or Obama, the spending is going to continue, and they're going to prop things up, which they've been doing for so many decades, but it's getting more difficult every time. So they may get a temporary reprieve. They may pretend they're going to do such and such in order to cut down on the deficit. But I think what we're going to be facing is something like what Greece is facing, that not every once in the last 2 years, there's always been an announcement, oh, we're going to handle this, we're going to get a loan, and we're going to solve our problems, and the markets respond favorably, and then a week or two later, they know there was no real plan. And I think that's what we'll continue to do, but eventually, probably during these next 4 years, it'll be realized that there's no plan of substance, and therefore people are going to begin to realize that everything that we do is based on debt and spending and the creation of new money and credit, and that it will no longer, not only that it won't stimulate the economy, it won't even maintain the status quo, and that's when I think people will start to drift away from not only the dollar, but the other currencies as well, and they'll move their assets into their financial assets into things of real value. I expect that during this next 4 years, we should see a lot more price inflation to deal with.
I was speaking to Jeff Tucker last week, who's republishing your book, A Case for Gold, with Laissez-Faire Books after a 30-year gap. He said the book could have been written yesterday. What chance do you think we have of seeing a sound dollar, maybe based on gold or silver or something of actual real value, within the next 5, 10 or 20 years?
Next 5 years, probably too optimistic, but I think if we have this major crisis much bigger than 08 and 09, they will be forced to do it. And this is what's happened throughout history. They push it as far as they can get, but what they can't control is the issue of confidence. There's still a lot of confidence in the dollar. People rush to the dollar when there are, negative comments around the world. They will buy treasury bills. They will keep doing this, but eventually they will quit doing that, and that's when they'll have to have monetary reform. And I think they know it. I think other central banks are in better shape than even our central bank and our government to move in that direction. So somebody's going to move in that direction. So yes, but I think it's closer to probably 10 years before we have something that would be truly convertible. And even then, it might be once again, trying to get the benefits of gold without making it a true gold standard, which could be helpful, just like the Bretton Woods was not a gold standard, but it was a pseudo-gold standard. It contained the inflation a little bit. Things got much worse after Bretton Woods broke down. So my goal is to make sure that they work in the direction of having a truly gold coin convertible standard rather than just pretending there's gold, because if they do that, it just won't last very long.
After leaving Congress last week, or making your speech anyway, you're moving on to chair the Campaign for Liberty in the United States. Are you still going to have monetary policy and sound money and bringing the Fed into the open as an important part of your work at C4L?
Yes, we're going to continue to do that because Campaign for Liberty was responsible for going to the grassroots and getting them to tell their congressmen they ought to support our position on auditing the Fed. So even though we didn't get it passed, we got it passed in the House. We got the politicians at least knew that it was a benefit. They didn't all of a sudden become gold standard people and even put in the Republican platform. But that comes from stirring up the grassroots, and that's the purpose of Campaign for Liberty. So when in Congress, I've never worked with the assumption that if I am patient and work my way up the ladder and become a chairman of a committee, I can bring about changes. I think changes come from outside of Washington. So that's why I think my ability to spread a message of sound money and sound economics will be every bit as good as the opportunities I had while in Congress. So yes, the answer is I will be continue to work very hard on monetary policy since I consider it so crucial.
One of the things about President Obama, which I actually like, is that there seems to be a little bit less chance of a war with Iran and inflaming the Middle East under him than under Romney. What do you think the chances are of America's foreign policy spilling over again into outright problems in the Middle East?
Well, I think they're pretty great. And although I agree with you that Romney's or Obama sounded like he's a little less likely to start things, policies I don't think are any different. But my claim was that probably was what put Obama back into the White House, because he was less militant. And I think that people subtly, at least when they hear people saying, no, we should have more sanctions, we should be tougher, we should put troops here, and we should make sure the Iranians are disciplined, this sort of thing, that makes people nervous. I don't think they say as much because they're afraid of saying, if you don't support the war, you don't support the troops. If you don't support the troops, you're un-American and unpatriotic. I'd like to change all that attitude. But, I think there's a major chance that we're going to continue, and that it'll get out of control. They might not sit down one day and say, well, let's have a war with Iran. Well, something will happen, either with the Palestinians or with the Syrians, and then they'll say, well, we got to go after the Iranians as well. And before you know it, it will escalate much more than they had expected.
Do you think America would be able to afford such a thing if they keep going with quantitative easing and printing of money? Maybe confidence in the dollar will collapse to a point where they can't afford such a conflict.
Well, that day is coming. We just don't know. As long as foreigners will take our treasury bills and will finance these wars, because we don't produce enough to really finance the wars. And that might be a blessing in disguise when that day comes when we can't afford them. The world was certainly better off once the Soviets realized that economically they could not sustain their empire and they had to leave Afghanistan. So when that day comes, which I believe it will come, because I frequently would say in front of a Republican audience, I said, you may disagree with me, and you may want these troops over there, you may want to do these things, but I'm going to win the argument because we're eventually not going to be able to afford it. I think that will come, but once again, we don't know whether that'll be in a year or 2 or 3 years from now. But we do not have enough production in this country. We do not produce enough wealth where we can take care of $220 trillion worth of entitlements coming due in the next decade or so. At the same time, maintaining an empire that's costing us well over $1 trillion every year. So that will come to an end, and hopefully we'll come to our senses when that happens.
Now, some have seen the shale oil revolution as being a boon for someone like Obama or the American political establishment. They see it as perhaps keeping the game going a bit longer. Do you think the shale oil revolution will keep the American government's game going longer?
Oh, yeah, that's always helpful. In spite of inflation, the computerized world and computers and cell phones and all, that's actually helps the economy, and technology drives prices down and sort of covers up the mistakes. So, something like this will temporarily help. But all of a sudden there will come a day when the cost of even producing shale oil is going to be costly. The prices will always be pushed up. I think it's only temporary, but all you can say is, what if we had sound money and a sound economy and we discovered this much of an alternative to, pumping oil out of Saudi Arabia? I mean, it would be a real help to us, but it'll be a temporary help, but it doesn't solve the problems of debt and quantitative easing.
When the great monetary reset does come, and I believe like you that it will come, governments will try to keep a gold standard or some hard money standard under their own control. What chance do you think there is of private monies arising which are outside the control of government?
Right now it's rather slim. I've had a bill in to legalize competition and go let the market make these decisions. But you can tell what happens when the one individual tried to use private gold and silver coins as money and committed no fraud whatsoever and never reneged on his payments. He was closed down and millions of dollars worth of gold and silver was stolen from him by the government. Government doesn't like competition. They want a monopoly. So that is a major thing, but hopefully we can open that up a little bit so that there could be competition. When the currency crashes and the government isn't there to reassure us with a better currency, there will be an underground economy. There will be some transactions one way or the other, and if the paper money's not working so well, they will use something else. This is why a major step in the 1970s of at least allowing American citizens to own gold, once again, was a tremendous step, in the right direction. So we have to keep, teaching the people why it's so important to have this right. And right now we're making this progress because more people now question the wisdom of the central bank, the Federal Reserve, than ever before in the last 100 years. So we have to just keep this educational effort going.
You must be having a nice rest after an exceptionally busy 2 years. Are you writing any new books that our Gold Money listeners might be interested in reading?
Well, not directly with the money issue. I'm trying to write something right now and to promote, home schooling, independent schooling, non-government schools, because as long as we're dependent on government schools, we're going to have problems. I want people to think that a true education has to come elsewhere. And also, I'm working on something which is not about to be ready on the issue of foreign policy and war, the war issue, why war is insanity when it comes to the economy, and this whole thing that the whole notion that we got out of our Great Depression because we had World War II is so much nonsense that even today we hear talk, about war. Wars help the economy. We hear the so-called strict conservatives in Washington say, well, we can't close this plant down that builds these airplanes because it'll close down too many jobs. And with almost saying, we don't need the airplanes. I mean, we're not about to have a need for these things, but we can't do away with the jobs. So that's the kind of attitude about war and war spending and how it influences government that I think we have to address as well.
Yes, it'll be nice if Bob Murphy can get Paul Krugman in a room for a debate to debate the Keynesian myth of the Second World War.
That'd be great.
Finally, just to wrap up, my good friend, Mr. Michael McKay, tells me that your wife, Carol, has become an internet star and she's now famous for her presidential campaign book. Can I ask you how it feels to be married to a culinary superstar, and what's your favourite recipe of hers?
Well, the one that's mine, along with many other members of the family, is shrimp and rice. And it has Texas shrimp and Texas rice in it, and a lot of cheese. It's very tasty. So that's one of our most favorites. But she is pretty well known. I'm surprised. She was very well known in the congressional district. And, a presidential race around the country, you think, well, that's going to be a different story. It won't be as personalized. But with the Internet, and all the things going on in this cookbook that she designed, we even passed it out in the presidential campaign, which I didn't think would be the smartest thing to do. But I always pretend I criticize this technique of sending out a family cookbook, but then I always say, I have to admit, she probably gets more votes for me than I get for myself.
That shrimp, rice and cheese dish sounds delicious. Okay, thank you very much for your time today, Congressman Paul, and I wish you all the very best of luck in your future endeavours.
Thank you very much for having me on.
to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our Gold Research section. The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the Gold Money Podcast with Andy Duncan, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Today, Monday, November the 19th, in the week following his farewell address to Congress, I'm very privileged to be speaking to...
With the fact that in the last 100 years we drifted away from the original intent of the Constitution, and we have a government that doesn't even resemble what the founders wanted. And I am most pleased with the fact that the younger generation, in large number, is now looking at these views, and I just hope we can keep the momentum going.
And where do you see America going in the next 4 years under the second term of President Obama?
I think economically it's going to go down, but I think it would have gone down with Romney as well, because none of them talked about the issue of what the role of government ought to be. Should we not be the policeman of the world? Should we not be the lender of last resort and bail out everybody? Should we run a welfare state? They didn't ask these questions, so they don't even talk about cutting spending. So whether it's Romney or Obama, the spending is going to continue, and they're going to prop things up, which they've been doing for so many decades, but it's getting more difficult every time. So they may get a temporary reprieve. They may pretend they're going to do such and such.
What do you think its legacy will be?
Well, the thing that I feel most pleased about is getting young people to think about important issues, such as individual liberty, property rights, contract rights, monetary policy, and the role of government. And I think that is necessary. Actually, to change things, you have to change people's mind on what they think the role of government ought to be. And young people seem to be responding to my concerns that I expressed, that we're in a mess. They have a mess. They're getting out of school. They have a lot of debt, and they don't have jobs. And it has a lot to do...
To Congressman Ron Paul. Hello, Congressman Paul.
Hello. Nice to be with you today.
This year, the Republican Party chose Mitt Romney as their presidential candidate, who went on to lose against Barack Obama, whereas I think you would have won. Despite this setback, you still achieved much with your campaign. You brought Austrian economics to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Very importantly, you brought the Federal Reserve out from behind their green curtain in the Emerald City. And best of all, you regularly brought looks of panic onto the face of Chairman Bernanke. What do you believe your presidential campaign accomplished, and what do